Okay, how many here from the Genealogical Society or have done their family genealogy? Okay, how many people here are related to the Haskin family, the Wilson family, or the Dickinson family that was here in the Cottage Grove area? I'm the only one, oh well.
I have worked on the Haskins family.
And I would like to thank Cottage Grove when I drove in. I mean, we're talking about a good old country boy here, and they did up all the roads in fashion, so it feels like you're driving in the 1920s out there, just for this. So you can blame me for all the roads. Anyway, want to talk about Kurt Irish. He was just a kid who grew up in a small logging town. His family worked in lumber. He worked in lumber. He did other jobs as well. And he got interested in history. And over his lifetime of 90 years, he collected over 30,000 photographs and 18 boxes full of documents, as well as hundreds of oral histories that were just in his head. He blessed me with his collection a number of years ago to add to my growing collection. And we worked together for quite a few years before he passed, but he collected more than just our area. So that's why we're down here, because he also collected Cottage Grove and Bohemia and the local areas. But this is Kurt. That's actually a senior photo from high school. This is his family. His grandparents, oops, hold on. His grandfather and his grandmother, two half cousins. This is Vaude Sutherland and Olive Sutherland. This is his dad, Charles, his Uncle Earl, and his Uncle Vic. Those four men, I think, are what played a big part of Kurt's interest in history. And the reason I think that is, we're going to start here with Dad, or Grandpa. He was gone before Kurt was born. But, as you can see there, he enlisted in the Civil War in the infantry. Then he got out, enlisted in the Navy, got out, and then enlisted back in the infantry. That's a Civil War guy. Lots of interesting stories because he served in both, lots of different places because of the different times he served. So he saw a lot of things, and Kurt was always impressed with that, and we'll get to more on that later. But this whole family I just showed you, all these people moved to Marcola at the same time around 1907. That was right when Marcola started booming and things started happening. The SP mills, Southern Pacific added 3 mills to Marcola and had openings for 600 men to come work. So you had 600 openings, these guys showed up. Some of them worked for the SPs and some of them filled in positions that were emptied at the other mills because they got better jobs over at the SP. You know how it is. So anyway, next is his Uncle Vic. Vic Irish was quite the character. He lived next door to Kurt, just up the road a sketch. And he was most interesting because of who he married. This is him working out in the woods. He's bucking the log there. You can see the wedges in the log up here. You can see the axes and a sledgehammer to drive the wedges in. And right here, you can make out a bottle with a hook on it that actually contained kerosene. And that was for when you sawed the log, you hit a pocket of pitch. The saw wouldn't go. Poured kerosene on it, got rid of the pitch. Runs like slick now. So that's Vic out there cutting in the woods. But he married a lady by the name of Flora Sutherland. Flora had divorced her husband back in the early days. And when she met Vic, they fell in love. And he took her in and raised her 2 kids, Vaude and Olive, as her own. What makes it interesting is that Flora's husband was none other than Ray Sutherland, the cop killer. Yeah, story goes that one night there was a story started by his son that he was doing some moonshining. He was living in a shop that used to be a joke shop in Marcola in 1930. And so the front room was his bedroom and the back room was just a storage area. Cops came through the front door, what we would now call a no-knock warrant. And on those days, they talked about it serving justice. One cop died, one cop got injured, and Vic disappeared. So they chased him over to the house where they thought he was, the one where his children and his ex-wife lived. And he got holed up in the barn there. Another cop dies, another cop gets injured. So then he sneaks out of the barn, they figure, and so they're looking for him. And the official stories always show him going across the Mohawk River and escaping somehow. According to the Inside Family Story, according to Vic, actually, he actually laid right next to the barbed wire fence in the tall ferns and said actually 2 of the guys climbing the fence stepped on him, looking for him. And he waited until they were all gone with the dogs going down across the creek, and then he got up and went the other way. They eventually caught him up at Oak Ridge at his daughter Olive's husband's cabin. And when they found him, he was asleep in a sleeping bag up under a couple of logs, and they didn't wait. They just opened fire, several hundred rounds, and the guy's in a sleeping bag. So, didn't last long. But he was famous. He was national news. I once gave a talk at the Secret Service headquarters in D.C., and they have a display to him. What's interesting, he was never ever convicted for moonshining or bootlegging. Not one single case was he ever even accused of it before the one that killed him. There's his two children, Vaude and Olive. Now see, Vaude, he was the one who did it. Vaude always was out moonshining. He got busted as young as 12 running shine. At 16, he got caught with his own still. What was interesting was the still that they used to say they were justified with Ray was actually Vaude's still from the years before. Exact same place. So what are the odds? So Vaude was the one, and so he was a big member of the family too, and he never really went to prison. He just grew up, but he was a lot older than Kurt, but see, all that history in the family, living right next door, you start thinking about bootlegging and history and that kind of stuff. So Kurt was interested. This is actually a bottle of Vaude Sutherland's shine. Years and years later, was the 80s, wasn't it, Steve? That they were remodeling the Kirkpatrick house? Can't remember, I think it was the 1980s anyway. They were remodeling the house where he used to live. They took the walls off for part of the remodel to put up drywall. They found several jars of this inside the wall. Original shine from the 1930s. This is Kurt's dad. Good looks running the family. Charles Irish, he was probably one of the better of the three. He was probably the most educated. Most of his time in the woods, he spent as the timekeeper or the tally man or the foreman. He did his numbers. I still have some of his actual time books where he marked people in and out of work. In those days, you didn't punch a time clock. The boss saw you and said, okay, you showed up at 8:30. You left at 4:55. I'm only giving you this many hours. And that's what he did. And here's a picture of one of the SP mills, SP mill number 1, the first one he worked at. And that's him sitting there. He's the one who figured out how to cut this big timber to get the most logs out of it. He was the scaler and figured it all out and told him, cut here, cut there, cut the cant so big and get them through the mill. And we have quite a few pictures of his dad sitting in mills or taking pictures with the millmen all over the place. He first married Mary Bell. They had 2 kids, Alza and Charles. But she was also interesting. They got divorced in 1925, but she also affected, Kurt wasn't born until July 1930. They got divorced in 25. And the way she affected Kurt's history love is she married the guy on top, Bill Ross. Kind of a funky looking guy, but he's having a good time because Bill's dad, Bill Ross, his dad is H.R. Ross, Henry Ross, who took hundreds and hundreds of pictures between the 1890s and 1900s all over Lane County. Some of the oldest pictures we have look like this one, which is an original Henry Ross, still on the original backer board. So Kurt would start by just getting these where he could find them. His dad had a big collection that Kurt eventually got. So here now we have tied Kurt family, extended family, to the primary producer of historical photographs of the day, even though it was his dad's first wife. After they got divorced, he married Edith Stroll. She had just graduated Mohawk. They were actually 25 years in their difference in ages, but they got married. Edith was very studious. She got very good grades. And we see her here again, right here in the front row. This was taken by the Marcola Church of Christ. That's Kurt sitting in her lap. This would have been taken in 1931, because this was taken on Mother's Day every year. The church would get out all the new moms, line them up, and take their picture. So these are all the new moms of between Mother's Day 30 and Mother's Day 31 that came to the church. So, but that's Kurt right down. So we have proof he did go to church at least once. Actually, he went more than that, but mostly as a kid. But anyway, so you can see, this is kind of where he grew up. I mean, board fences, board houses, the tar paper roofs, and everywhere trees. For those who are curious, the hillside behind there is behind the old Marcola grade school, not the current one. Anyway, this is what Kurt looked like going to school. That's Kurt. Bibbed overalls and big floppy ears. But he did okay. But you can always find him in the pictures. And this is, you grew up, you see most of the boys are wearing overalls. You know why? Because back in those days, you didn't make a lot of money. And if I don't get them overalls, I got to buy them pants and a belt. Belts aren't cheap, they're leather. Get the kids either some suspenders, like this kid has suspenders, and a belt. He's probably from a rich family. But most of these kids are wearing overalls. In fact, I think that kid's got overalls underneath his Letterman jacket. We can see there and there. Suspenders over here, just cheaper than a belt. So he grew up in not exactly lots of money. Then he did the coming of age thing in Marcola at the top of Hell's Hill. Location is undisclosed. You want it, you have to go find it by yourself. That's the rules. And to grow up in Marcola, one of the things was you had to hike up there and find it. This is Kurt when he found Whale Rock. We don't know a lot about that thing. It is an oddball where it's at and where it's sitting and how it looks. Some have thought it might be a Kalapuyan petroglyph that they've carved out. No way to date it, no way to prove it. It may be a natural rock. Don't know. But he found Whale Rock. This is Kurt with his mom Edith. This is Kurt. That's his older half-brother Charlie, and that's Mary. Mary's still with us, and she's a wonderful lady. She's about the sweetest thing you've ever met. Not many of you have done this, but what happens when you need water in your house? You dig your own well. Kurt went out and dug his well, and today the Marcola Water Board uses that well. Of course, it's been revamped a little, but it's the same well that Kurt dug all those years ago. Did it all by hand, by himself. He drove snowplow up on the passes in the winter. This one was taken up out of Odell. So, yeah, he gets up there and he did a lot of jobs all over the place, which got us interested in more than just where he grew up. This is the house he grew up in. He was actually born in the bedroom just inside that window. That house is still there today. Today it's owned by the school, and they use it as an office for their educational farm, right? So later they had this part of the porch enclosed. The house is a little wider now, but this is originally a one-room schoolhouse from the Marcola School District, District 79. It ran from 1901 to 1906. We know the name of every teacher who taught in that school. And then years later, Kurt's father bought the house. It was across the street where the school is now. They were building a new school. He took it across the street, turned it into a house. And then he started, like I said, collecting these old photos. Like, here's what Marcola looked like. This is roughly what it looked like about the time his parents came. That's Marcola, downtown. And what's funny is if you go to Marcola today, one of the most recognizable is the big old giant coal house and the store and the restaurant. That's about downtown Marcola, right? The coal house is behind that fir tree and everything else is beyond it. This is all just houses now and open. Where the whole town was is now gone. And he collected things of interest. Like here's I remember the original covered bridge at Marcola. This is them partially torn down and the temporary bridge being put in so they could eventually put in a no more covered bridge. It was right after this they preserved the rest of them and were able to save them. But he got pictures of all this stuff. He showed up for action. Then he went to Wendling. It was the big town. Wendling for most of its life was bigger than Florence at the same time frame. Wendling was usually like the 6th or 7th largest in the county, and Florence was usually 8 or 9. That just gives you an idea about if Wendling wasn't a company town, we'll still hear about what it'd be doing. He took pictures. This is the day the store closed in 1946 at Wendling. He got this picture. These are the 4 women who worked, 3 women worked in the store. The woman on the right, I actually live in her house. That's Alice Madison. She was the last postmistress at the post office that was in this building. The gas pumps are right behind them back when it was white gas and ethyl. Remember those days? This is just brush now. And then he started getting stuff from the camps. Booth Kelly had, number-wise, about 40-something camps. But by actual locations, they had over 100. Because some of the camps would move and keep their number. So he would go out and get all the pictures of all the camps he could. And then there's people like me trying to figure out where they were. He took pictures of the mills. This is the Fisher Valley mill, which moved to Springfield and became, when Milton Valley died, the Fisher Booton mill. And then when Fisher's retired, it became the Booton Parks mill and was in Springfield for a long time. But that's the start of it when it was still out at Marcola on Parsons Creek. This is another one of the SP mills up Parsons Creek. So showing more of the outline, you can see the whole, basically an entire town built up, whoops, wrong way, that one. Whole town built up around it, the mill, the pond. And they would cut the lumber and they would flume it down to Marcola to a planing mill. Many years later, they got rid of this mill and just built a big mill at Marcola, which a lot of people remember because it was there until 50s. Then he moved to Springfield. This is early Springfield. You probably won't recognize it. This is Springfield right here, which is pretty much where the bridge is. You know, if you go say that welcome to Springfield sign, you walk about 4 blocks, you're out of Springfield. Now Springfield is everything you can see there. The big Booth Kelly mill that was there for years is actually back over there. But it seemed like downtown. And you can see the river when it was there. He took pictures of houses, like this one over in Coburg. Some of them he would find old photographs and go find the house today and get the matching photograph. So a lot of towns, we get a lot of these. Then, ferries. There were a lot of bridges, but a lot of more ferries, and most of them started as ferries. He has pictures of many, many ferries. There's a book about historic ferries of Oregon. There are 5 ferries missing just from Springfield and the Mohawk. So there's a lot more out there. Pretty much anywhere a road goes down, dead ends at the water, it was a ferry. Somebody ran a ferry there. That's why it goes there. He got classes, kids, anywhere. You had old pictures of kids, he'd take them. Because this is a great way. Most of us, we have people we worked with for 20 years, but most people can look at this and say, hey, that's me there in the front row, and oh, that's little Sally sitting next to me and Tommy next to her, and we know the kids we grew up with and played with. So we collected those. This is Franklin, Oregon, also known as Smithfield. You got the blacksmith shop. He was always looking for finding any cool old picture, and the way he got them was he'd come over and say, Deborah, you got any old pictures I can see and take pictures of? And he would get them laid out on a little table. He had this rig set up, so it had a light on both sides. And then he had a camera mount directly over it, and he'd shoot flat down onto the picture, and then he would have a copy of the picture. So the bulk of his collection that I have is about 24,000 negatives from all those pictures. And there's no index, really. This is why I'm not all the way through yet. 24,000 negatives takes a while. But he got all these pictures. And the other thing you notice about Kurt is when they weren't identified right on the picture, he did 2 things. One, he would add this white strip down at the bottom, and he would put in what, who's in the picture, where is this, all that, and he would put this number over there. So this tells me this negative is on page 622 of negatives, and it's the 18th negative on that page. So if somebody wants this picture, I can go straight to the books and pull the negative. No problem. Today, if you're on Forgotten Oregon, Cottage Grove, Fall Creek, Jasper, anything, I see them all over the place. Roseburg, East, West, No Tide, whatever. You see that? They got it from Kurt. And they're pretty much, like I said, Forgotten Oregon, places like that. You see those all the time. These are salmon racks on the Walterville Power Canal to help guide the salmon, right? Who'd think of that? But he found somebody who had pictures. Major construction, there's Leeburg Dam being built. People sometimes would have these old books that they had when their grandma went to school or when they went to school or whatever, and it gave you, the school district, Blue River. This is a Blue River city up the McKenzie. 1901, Carrie Schrag was the teacher, and they only had 8 students in the school. Let's see, we got 3 Wyckoffs, 5 Eichhoffs, 6 Eichhoffs, and 2 Irelands. So there's your school. Now, how can you tell me you can't name all your classmates? Most of them are your brothers and sisters or cousins. A lot of old photos he got, he loved these, where you get an old photo, this is from Oak Ridge, but when they got their first car, when they were first converting over, you talk about the one guy in town that had the car. And these guys would get cars and they would have photos taken. And then you'd go through and try to figure out what they were. So a lot of times when I post pictures online, I'll post the history and say, can anybody ID the car? And there's a lot of gearheads out there, and I actually get them back usually. I can actually figure out the motorcycle or the car or whatever I'm looking for. The people know a lot more about them than I do.
Well, what is that, Dave?
That one?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Model A Ford.
You sure?
Yep.
Okay. They say it's a Model A. I'll find it in the catalog. The reason I say that is back in the 1920s, there was 147 different companies making cars in the United States. Like a Laporte. You ever seen a Laporte coupe? You get all these, and so some of them, they look like the name brand we all remember, but when it gets push comes to shove, the wheels are wrong or the headlamps are mounted wrong, but the body looks the same. So I'll check it though, I always do. I go back to the time and find an original ad that matches that vehicle. Okay, he would take maps like this. And here you can see, here's Cottage Grove, whoops. Here's Cottage Grove, right underneath the big hole. But you go up the river here, you see the town of Walden, Cerro Gordo, Dorina, Vaughan, Star, Wicks, Redbridge, Wildwood, Ruhata, Diston, all those just up there. And then you see up here, up past Pleasant Hill, we got Fall Creek, Hills, Jasper, Natron, Botsford, Lowell, Carter, Burgess, Landac, Signal, Eula, Lawler. Most people never heard of those towns. To be honest, half of them were under the reservoirs. But Kurt, when he found these, he would go out and try to find somebody who actually had pictures from those towns. So someone like Ruhata, he's got 4 pictures. But it's 4 pictures of Ruhata. Yeah, what?
We say Rujada.
Rujada? Okay. I was told it was Ruhata the last time I spoke, so Rujada. Good enough for me.
It's not a Spanish word. It's actually the Ru, J, and Da, I think were guys' initials who worked for the lumber company.
Okay. I'll buy it. This is not I do the Mohawk Valley. This is just the extraneous I got from Kurt. Cottage Grove from an early day. Looks a little different now, doesn't it? Look at those nice big yards on those houses. And people have barns out behind their houses in places. Some of them still have outhouses. This is in Cottage Grove. This is when they were switching from horse and wagon to cars. This is Detroit, Oregon. He went all the way up to Detroit, all the way up to Santiam, all the way up to Brighton Bush, all the way up in the mountains. And we get pictures all the time. This is a huge turntable for turning the locomotive around. Believe it or not, when they got on that thing, a machine did not turn the locomotive. There's a handle on this end. One guy would grab and walk it around on the sidewalk. It was that well balanced. There was another one at Wendling. There was one at Marcola. Most places, if the train had to turn around, there was one of these. But it was actually done by hand. It was balanced, so you could just spin that locomotive, which is actually pretty cool. This is the Holly School, just over the hill from the Mohawk Valley. Again, a mass of kids. Look at the dirty clothes, the old boots. Some of these kids, if you look real close, things don't quite fit. They're hand-me-downs, because you didn't buy school clothes every year for your kid. You bought him a shirt until he outgrew it, or tore it up and you whipped him and had to buy another one, or until he outgrew it and then it went to his brother. Or his sister in some cases. We actually have pictures of some that we figured out, they look really funny looking dresses. We figured out they were men's shirts turned around backwards so they buttoned up the back and it hit the girls about mid-shin, so it was a dress. Welcome to school. But he also did this. He tried to get the names of every kid in every photo. I've been able to figure out a lot he didn't have because I have way more collection than what he had originally, so I've been able to add to it, but I also have facial recognition software. So if I find somebody in one photo, I can find them in others, which is usually pretty nice. Then he traveled around to the mining districts. He went up to Bohemia. He got the maps. He got photos of all the big mines and some of the smaller ones, and then he actually hiked into every mine he could find and took pictures. That one's the Champion mine, the tramway coming down out of the mine with the ore. Did the same thing over on the McKinsey. This is them hauling into the Lucky Boy mine up in Blue River. Look at that road. They're hauling up that thing. These are guys actually in the entrance to the Lucky Boy mine. He did this. He also did it up at Detroit. He did it over on the Calapooya. All the mining districts, he's been into every one of those mines. He hiked everywhere. On those hikes, Hallie sitting over here helped him do a lot of this. He loved flowers and plants. And he would go out and he would photograph any cool things he found. And then he would actually identify them and then post them online. Or it's on his hard drive. So he has all these wonderful, there's almost 7,000 of these wildflower pictures. Yes, there's more than one of some flowers, but still, it's like 7,000 digital photos on his hard drive. It's a beautiful tiger lily out there. I don't know where he found that, but they grow out there wild. So he did that, and here's a guy, I know he was still doing it to what? He's 87, 88, he'd get out there, get on his hands and knees to take a photo of a little mushroom or something. You know, think about the dedication that takes, driving for hours, and you get down there and you know it's hard getting back up, but you still get down there and take that picture. He also took pictures of things like this, where people ravaged the outside world. He didn't like it much. He also participated and photographed a lot of the cleanup crews that would go up where people dumped their trash or their couch or shot things up and get it all cleaned up again. He went to events. This is part of Mary Cole Day, where we celebrate Marcola's namesake. She was that's Arlene Moore. She was the queen that year of the parade. So he went to Mary Cole Day. He went to Carriage Me Back in Brownsville. He came down here for Bohemia Mining Days. If your town had a historic day, Kurt showed up, took pictures, and bugged people. That's what he did. He was good at it too. The other thing he did was fire towers. They were going away. They were disappearing. So Kurt, he knows where a bunch of them are. He's been hiking into all the mountain lakes, fishing. He's seen a bunch of these. So he goes out and finds a photograph of everyone in the state, or actually personally hiked there and took a photo of the platform like this one. And just to make sure he got them all, he bought this book, Fire Lookouts of the Pacific Northwest. He looked up, he got one of every one listed in this book, either like this or like the one before. Yeah, think about that. He wants to get them all. Here's the master book. And you can see it's well used. So he was out there all the time. I was always hiking somewhere. And in the last couple of years, when he couldn't quite hike so much and whatnot, it was kind of harder on him, but he still liked going out there and seeing things. He still just drive around and look. He was also fascinated by Native Americans. The place where his house was built and the school across the street was a Calapooyan village. He had a huge collection of stuff that had been found there when they built the school parking lot technically. But he would download any of these cool Native American pictures, and he would go. This particular one's from the Brownsville Carriage Me Back days. They're Indian dancers that came there. But he would go to things that had Native American dancers or artists or whatever and take photos of these people. So he has a pretty good sized Native American collection. Because of his grandpa, he was interested in the Civil War. That's Sheridan and his generals in the Civil War. Came from the National Archives. This one did too. This is Andersonville Prison. Anybody ever heard of that one? Yeah, this made German death camps actually look kind of good. Most of the guys that came out of there were skeletons when they were done. There was no medical treatment. There was no food most of the time. And James Haskins, fighting Jim Haskin, that I'm descended from here in Cottage Grove, he may be in that picture because he spent his last 8 months of the Civil War in Andersonville And this picture was taken on the day it was set free. So he's probably out there in that crowd somewhere. Then he was also a member of the Obsidians Hiking Club. That got him into a lot of places. He has a whole section on Obsidians. And they've been really helpful. They've been giving me stuff about Kurt and things as well. But you can see Kurt sitting down there in the corner with the rest of the hiking club. The Wendling Preservation Association gave him an Oshkosh Award. Something they only gave to people who really helped preserve the history. I think they only ever gave out like 6 of them. Kurt got one of those. Later, Lane County History Museum after he died, because Kurt hated recognition with a passion. In fact, I'm breaking a promise I made to him by showing you this. He didn't want it known. The only thing I was disappointed in this thing was it says it's for preserving the history of the Mohawk Valley. He preserved a lot more than the Mohawk Valley. Over half his collection is not Mohawk Valley, although a lot of it is. But he got that, and I accepted it. And it was a very nice presentation. And right now it's staying with his collection. And that's what Kurt looked like towards the end. But now, what do we do with this collection? This guy curated 30,000 photos. This guy collected all these documents and stuff. Well, the Mohawk Valley stuff I use to further the research, put online, educate people, use them in talks like this. Others, we find people like Bert over here, who is the Jasper historian, and his friend Barbara, who's the Fall Creek historian. I gave them copies of all the Kurt pictures of Jasper and Fall Creek, so they can use them in their research. So now I need Deborah up here. Whoops. It's okay. Deborah's going to get the Cottage Grove pictures, including Bohemia. Hold your hands out.
Thank you.
Well, you're not done.
You're going to make me cry.
Oh, yep. We're going to make you cry because this is going to kill you going down the stairs. There you go. And what we're doing here is, like I said, these are copies. I still have the originals in the negative form, but this allows the pictures he curated and printed out as copies to be used by historians to build and preserve the history in the area where they are the expert, and Deborah is one of those. So, there you go. Well, thank you. Do I have any questions about anything? No questions at all?
So where did he find these photos?
Okay, again, it was word of mouth mostly. He got a collection from his dad, and then he would talk to people like my dad or other old timers and get pictures, and he'd say, anybody's got more of these? Oh, you go talk to Sam down the road there. He's up there, I'll give you his phone number, and then Kurt would make an appointment. He spent 40 years collecting these. He kept track of who was the original owner of the photograph. I have their names and addresses and phone numbers, which today is pretty much worthless because I think all of them are gone. Because he started doing this back in the 50s, and they were old people then, so I'm pretty sure the bulk are.
Did he hit newspaper archives or anything?
Yes, he did. He got everything he could get his hands on. He wouldn't pay for things. He was a stickler that way. He got himself kicked off Forgotten Oregon online because he posted a bit of history, the last wolf ever shot in the area, and they kicked him off for that because he included a dead animal. But he thought it was historically significant, the last wolf ever shot in the area. And being almost 90 years old at the time, he just wasn't going to bend to their will. So he had me post on his behalf there. But he just word of mouth going again. He would go to these old celebrations. He would bring the local pictures and show them off, and then meet people and get their name and address, call them up, come down, visit them, get their pictures. Today, the pictures I get to continue to add, some of it's the same way. People loan me their pictures to digitize, identify, and then return with a digital copy plus the full identification, and the only cost is I get to keep a digital copy. That's it. Others say, my kids don't want these, you want them? And I get stuff that way all the time. Everything from paper Booth Kelly money to old lodge pins to logging equipment. I got lots of stuff. My house is, I'm an empty nester, but the rooms aren't empty. They're full of my history stuff now. Yes?
Do you have a museum?
Not yet.
Not yet.
There's been talks of a museum. school has talked that they might make Kurt's house into a museum. However, that's currently up for debate, and they probably won't. It's not something the school's really interested in. One day I hope to be able to get to a museum. Weyerhaeuser was talking about one for a time out there, and didn't happen. So, I don't know. And when I'm gone, digital copies of everything are going to go to Springfield Museum and the Lane County Museum and the Marcola Community Center. And I'm really hoping and praying I will find a successor to me somewhere along the line. Somebody will take my work and continue.
Are you leaving soon, Dave?
Not planning on it, but if you keep bugging me, I might keel over in any minute. He's on the Springfield Museum board, and he's always bugging me. Any other questions? Oh, come on. Somebody's got a question. Really? Oh, there you go.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that house and how it was the schoolhouse that moved across the road?
Yeah. Okay. District 42 in the Mohawk Valley used to cover the whole upper valley. Then, in the late 1800s, they made District 79, which was Mill Creek, and 42 became basically Parsons Creek down to Donna. And the dividing line between the school districts is, today you can see the remnants of the old Fisher Mill. The edge of the Fisher Mill was the boundary between the school districts. And in those days, they had rules about how far kids cannot be allowed to walk more than 3 miles one way to school. So if you had a big district, every 3 miles you have to have a schoolhouse. So the schoolhouse was originally the second schoolhouse. We don't know where the first one was, but the second schoolhouse we know of in District 79 was up Wendling Road at the end of Pashaki Road, about halfway to what became Wendling. But when Wendling came, they took half of District 79, then they took half of District 130, which was the one further up the valley, and essentially killed off 130. Within 3 years, it was just, we're Wendling now, forget it. And 79 was having a problem. Most of our kids now go to Wendling. And we had 2 schoolhouses, one on each side of the Mohawk. And so they decided that this is right near 130, which is just like another half mile up the road. So they built a schoolhouse where the high school, Mohawk High School, sits. And that's the house that was Kurt's house. And they opened that up in 1901. But in 1906, we had District 144 encroaching on 42 from the other side. And so they decided that they were going to merge districts. Since 79 had more students by 2, they kept 79 as their number. And so they now needed a school that was, District 42 had 4 schoolhouses, grade schools at that time. And they were spread up and down Parsons Creek and down the valley. So they wanted was one more central to the town. And they basically put it right on the boundary between the school districts. And that was a big new school they built. It was big enough for everybody. So at that time, they stopped using the one there. The 06 year was the last year they used Kurt's house, because now everybody's going down to this new one. Marcola maintained 2 grade schools for 30-something years, because they had one at the top of Parsons Creek, a grade school, and then the one there in town. And so when we don't know exactly when I haven't found Kurt's dad bought that building, whether it was then or if it was later in 24 when they created Mohawk Union High School. They had to have a place to build it. So there was this nice old plot of land where the old school set, so that's what they chose to use. So we didn't know if they pulled it out to save it from the destruction to make the new school, or if he'd already bought it before and moved it across the road. But that's how it ended up where it is. Anything else? Yeah.
What happened to Wendling?
Wendling was a company town in every sense of the word. They owned the land, they owned the buildings, they owned the mill, they owned the store, they owned everything. So like Valsette's, when the Boise Cascade pulled out, when Booth Kelly shut their mill down, we're out of here. What actually killed them was twofold. One is when they first started, if they had maintained 1900 technology, it would have taken them 200 years to cut all that timber. It really would have. They weren't going that fast. Not with 2-man misery whips, right? But technology got better, and we're logging faster now. And in the early days, what they did was they scraped the land off clean and then seed it with grass and then lease it out for cattle to graze. What does that do to baby fir trees? You don't get any. So it doesn't regrow. About the 1920s, they figured, oh, we're cutting a lot faster now, we need more timber. They started replanting, especially once the 3Cs showed up in the 30s. There was a lot of replanting. But still, most of the land was just open grass and ferns. And the trees grew in. By 1945, log trucks were in. Now, which is cheaper? A bunch of log trucks hauling logs into the Springfield mill, or paying for more and more mileage on an antiquated railroad system, locomotives, all the cars, to haul them to Wendling, to cut them up, to put them on cars, to haul them to Springfield. So basically what happened was the log truck put it out of business. So no more Wendling Mill, no more employment, you all need to move now. My grandfather was the high bidder on the Methodist parsonage, which is the only private piece of property in Wendling. So that's where I grew up. And then 1957, 58, they cut the last stand of old growth out of the forks of the Mohawk. And then in 59, they sold out to Georgia Pacific. GP owned it until 85. Now it's Weyerhaeuser. Now it requires a permit for access to Weyerhaeuser lands. But that's happened to Wendling. Basically, technology killed it. We don't need mills right at the woods. We can haul them somewhere now for a lot cheaper. Any other questions?
If someone is interested in the source of a photo, might there be notes?
Yes. For every photo in his collection, I have the name and address and phone number of the donator. Yeah. Not always for the hard copies. Those came in envelopes that sometimes had names on them and sometimes didn't. And when I digitized them, I preserved the name that came with it in the metadata on the file. So I can always look at a file and tell you where it came from. But for the negatives, yeah, all of them. I got the source. So, and that's the other thing is you get Wendling photos. 3 photos, same class, right? Bunch of little second graders at Wendling. All 3 photos were labeled by somebody in the photo. All 3 labelings were identical except for this one girl in the front row. And that one girl, all 3 had as a different person. Oh, so I'm scratching my head, so I do my research. Well, one girl's 2 years older, probably not her. Another girl wasn't in Wendling that year. She didn't come till the next year, so it's not her. And the other one actually left Wendling before the picture was taken. So now who is it? So I hit the school censuses to tell you who lives in what town when, and found a girl that lived in Wendling for only 8 months during the school year. That would have been in that class. So I was able to process elimination. She's the actual one in the photo. Then later, I was able to contact her family, get actual known photos of her, and yeah, it's her. But it's funny, you get these, and it's like, so he would have no problem taking 3 or 4 of the same photo from different people, because they're labeled differently. And some of the information, sometimes part of this photo is damaged, but on the other one, a different part is damaged. When I combined the 2 to get one perfect photo. So he always got whatever he could get. And he lamented in his later years, in the early days, he got the ones he thought were cool. He told me that. Those were real interesting and very cool, so I got those. Now I'm kicking myself because that guy had like 200 more photos, and I wish I'd got them now because I found out his kids threw them out. Never throw out old. How many people have old photos at home? Parents, grandparents, whatever. Yeah. How many people can name every person in every photo and tell you where it came from? Yeah, we got cousins from grandma and grandpa, great grandma or whatever. Getting harder to name. Yeah. And those are usually the ones the kids, when they come along, say, yeah, well, here's grandma and grandpa. I don't know who this person is, so I toss it. You know, find a museum, find a local historian. We will take anything we can get our hands of and preserve it. Because personally, I believe digital world now is I can make thousands of copies of all these pictures and get them out to all these different people. Whereas if I just set it in my house, hoarded it in the room, and you had to come find me to ask questions, what happens if my house burns? That's a problem. All that history, gone. So I'm working very hard to prevent that. So, any other questions? Yes?
Let's shift gears just a little bit.
Sure.
It seems like about 20 years ago that I had heard that Curtis had built a house in Eugene, built it physically himself. Does that ring a bell with you?
No. He did go to a hospice care in Eugene. Was it Eugene he went to? Yeah.
What about working with universities, the students, on his techniques of photographs?
A little. I know he did some where people would come and talk to him, and I think he went in for earlier years a couple of times. His collection, he tried to give it to U of O, but they decided it was too large for them to handle. Most museums did. I've talked to like Oregon Historical Society, U of O, Oregon State, Wayne County, Springfield, all these museums, and if I go and they got to go somewhere, if it's a museum, a lot of them will toss most of it. They just don't have the storage space, or somebody to go through 27,000 negatives and figure out what they are. So, for now, I'm happy. I'm getting stuff done. Steve?
Lloyd, what you might be thinking of was back over 20 years ago, I had that courtesy appointment at the U of O, and I got Curtis Irish a appointment there too. And I had it set up for the U of O to get his collection, but it was not written down, and they changed curators. James Fox
Yep.
would, and a new person, and James Fox was very interested in Oregon, Northwest history. The new person said, we want an international focus.
Yep.
I was so stunned.
Yep. That's the other problem, is even if you give it to a good person, what if they change their mind?
Yeah.
You know, what happens if I'm one of those fly-by-night historians and next year I get bored with it and just quit, and the stuff just sits in my spare room? That's not right. That's why I only give the photos to people I know have proven themselves online, to me at least, that they're doing this to make people educated.
You can't even fly in the morning.
Anyway, any other question? I got another one.
Two other hobbies that Curtis had. And one of them was collecting brass shell casings.
Yes?
And he would save them by the bucketful until the price was right.
Yep.
He did very well with those.
Yep. Collecting brass.
Yeah. And then another hobby he had was collecting classical country music from the early 1900s.
Yep. Yeah, he told me, like I said, he didn't go to church much. When he was about 5, he was caught down, his mom and dad would send him down to the local Methodist church, basically get him out of the house for a while, right? He went down there and out in the parking lot before church, playing marbles with the preacher's kid, and won a penny off of him. Well, that preacher came out and laid down God's law, and you're going to hell, and you're going to be struck by lightning, and for gambling on God's soil and all this stuff. And Kurt said he was so scared he ran all the way home, and he kept stopping and looking because he swore he was going to get hit by lightning at any second. And he never went back to church after that until my parents' funeral. That was the first time we know that he deliberately set foot inside of a church, which I thought was kind of special in itself. But he did tell me in his later years that one of his fondest memories as a child was the old hymns they sung in that church when he was a little kid. And I pointed out, like, our church has 2 services. The first one sings the old hymns. I said, Kurt, you can go in there, sit in the lobby, listen to the hymns, and walk out. Nobody's going to care. I don't know if he ever took me up on that. I don't think he did, but, you know, he was a nice guy. And he had a very interesting family. Anything else? We're about time for trivia, aren't we?
Yes.